Welcome, brave souls, to Midnight Whispers. Traverse this realm at your own peril. For within these tales lurk horrors most foul. Tonight's tale may twist the very fabric of your sanity. And a word to the wise, this narrative paints pictures of terror not meant for every eye or ear. Venture ahead if you dare, but remember, you have been warned.
My name is John, and what I'm about to share might sound implausible, but every word is true. It began in our peaceful suburban neighborhood, a place where each house stood with well-manicured lawns, and the biggest excitement was the annual block party. That tranquility was shattered by an unexpected inheritance from my grandmother, a puppet named Mr.Giggles. Grandmother, a wealthy woman with a penchant for antiquities, had a reputation for her eccentric taste. She found Mr.Giggles at an estate sale in a grand old house that belonged to a reclusive collector. This house, known in our town for its sprawling gardens and mysterious past, was filled with artifacts from around the world. Among these, Mr.Giggles, perched atop an ancient oak shelf, caught her eye. She described him as a quaint treasure, but to me, he was anything but. When she presented Mr.Giggles to us, I remember the chill that ran down my spine. The puppet was about 3 feet tall, its wooden body carved with meticulous detail, yet worn by time. Its face was painted with a wide, permanent grin, the paint cracked and faded, and its eyes, unnervingly large and glassy, seemed to follow me around the room. We placed Mr.Giggles in the nursery, which I was renovating for our upcoming addition to the family. The room was spacious, with one large window overlooking our backyard garden. I'd chosen a soft blue for the walls, and the furniture was a mix of new and old. A hand-me-down rocking chair from my wife's family, a brand new crib, and amidst this, the out-of-place Mr.Giggles. My wife, sensitive to the fumes and noise of the renovation, decided to stay with her sister for a week. I was left alone in the house with the increasingly unsettling company of Mr.Giggles. At first, the days passed without incident. I busied myself with painting, assembling furniture, and occasionally glancing uneasily at the puppet. But then, things began to change subtly. I would enter the room to find Mr.Giggles in a slightly different position than where I'd left him. At first, I rationalized it. Perhaps the floorboards creaked under my weight, causing him to shift. But the small changes became more pronounced. An arm raised, his head turned towards the door, as if watching for my return. Then, one evening, I heard a noise, a soft, creaking sound, like the gentle rocking of the chair in the nursery. My heart pounding, I inched towards the room. The sight that greeted me was chilling. Mr.Giggles was no longer on the shelf. He sat in the rocking chair facing the door as if waiting for me. The dim light from the hallway cast long, twisted shadows across his grinning face. That night I lay awake trying to dismiss what I had seen. Was this a trick of the mind? A product of renovation fatigue? But deep down I knew there was something deeply wrong with Mr.Giggles. The puppet had a presence, an unspoken malevolence that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The days following the incident in the nursery were marked by a palpable sense of dread that hung over me like a shroud. The once comforting solitude of our home now felt oppressive, with every creak and whisper of the house setting my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that the glassy-eyed stare of Mr.Giggles was tracking me, biding its time. On the third night, alone in the silence of the house, the uncanny nature of Mr.Giggles revealed itself in full. It was well past midnight when I was jolted awake by a sound that froze my blood. The distinct, unmistakable laughter of a child emanating from the nursery. It was a high-pitched, gleeful sound, yet there was something deeply wrong about it, something twisted. Heart-pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I had started keeping by my bed and cautiously made my way to the nursery. The laughter grew louder, more unhinged, as if whatever was making the sound was reveling in its sinister play. As I reached the door, the laughter abruptly stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I flicked on the light and my breath caught in my throat. Mr.Giggles was not in the rocking chair. My eyes frantically searched the room and found him standing in the middle of the nursery, his wooden body upright and facing me, those large eyes shining unnaturally in the artificial light. Before I could process this impossibility, Mr.Giggles moved. It was a jerky, unnatural motion, as if unseen strings were pulling him. He spoke, his voice a chilling mimicry of a child's playful tone. "Come play, John. It's so much fun." I stood frozen in terror, my grip on the bat tightening. The puppet took a step forward, its movements disjointed yet purposeful. In a flash of adrenaline-fueled fear, I swung the bat with all my might. It connected with a sickening crack, splintering wood and scattering painted fragments across the floor. But Mr. Giggles was not deterred. With alarming speed, he lunged at me, his claw-like fingers extended. I barely dodged, feeling the sharp graze of his wooden digits against my skin. I swung again, hitting him squarely in the torso, sending him flying against the wall. I didn't wait to see if he would get up. I bolted from the room, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, panting heavily. My mind raced. What was this thing? How could it move, talk, attack? The answers eluded me, lost in a haze of fear and disbelief. I knew I had to get rid of it, to destroy it completely. But as I stood there, catching my breath, the silence of the house was shattered once more. This time by the sound of scraping and thumping coming from the nursery, as if Mr. Giggles was picking himself up, undeterred by the violence of our encounter. I realized with a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Mr. Giggles was not just a puppet. He was something far more malevolent, a twisted entity that had been awakened, and now, it seemed, he was out for blood. The rest of that night was a blur of terror. After hearing the sounds of Mr. Giggles stirring in the nursery, I backed away, my mind racing for a solution. But there was none to be found in the empty, echoing corridors of my home. The thought of facing that thing again was paralyzing. Eventually, the noises stopped, and a deathly silence fell over the house. I must have dozed off from sheer exhaustion because the next thing I remember is the piercing light of dawn cutting through my living room window. I awoke with a start, my neck stiff from sleeping upright in a chair. The events of the night before crashed over me, and I cautiously made my way to the nursery. The room was empty. The window was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the gentle morning breeze. Mr. Giggles was gone. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a deep, unsettling dread. Where had he gone? What was he going to do? I spent the morning in a state of heightened anxiety, jumping at every sound, every knock at the door. But it was the sight on my front porch that brought the horror of my situation into sharp, gruesome focus. There on my doorstep was a grisly trophy, the severed head of my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. Her eyes were wide open in terror, her mouth agape in a silent scream. Blood, now dried and dark, caked her neck. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat, my mind reeling in shock and disbelief. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Mr. Giggles had done this. And worse, it seemed that the blood, it was regenerating him. The splintered wood and cracked paint from our encounter the night before were gone. He had somehow repaired himself. Panic set in. Mr. Giggles was out there somewhere, a malevolent force of unimaginable horror. And he had killed. The police would be involved now, and how could I explain this? Who would believe that a puppet was capable of such atrocity? I called the police, my voice trembling as I reported finding Mrs. Henderson's body. When they arrived, I told them I had found her like this, leaving out the unbelievable truth about Mr. Giggles. The investigation was swift, but without leads or motives, it hit a dead end. The neighborhood was in shock, and fear hung in the air like a thick fog. But the terror was far from over. News began to trickle in, reports of attacks throughout the neighborhood, each more brutal than the last. Mr. Giggles was on a rampage, leaving a trail of blood and chaos in his wake. As the sun set on that day of horror, I knew I couldn't stay idle. Mr. Giggles had to be stopped, and somehow I had to be the one to do it. The puppet had become a monster, and I felt responsible for unleashing it upon the world. Armed with determination and a deep-seated fear, I set out into the night, following the trail of carnage, hoping to put an end to Mr. Giggles's bloody rampage. As night descended, cloaking the neighborhood in darkness, I set out with a grim resolve. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual nighttime chatter replaced by a suffocating silence. I moved cautiously, my senses heightened, every shadow and sound sending jolts of adrenaline through me. In my hand, I clutched the bat that had become my reluctant companion. The trail of Mr. Giggles wasn't hard to follow, a nightmarish path marked by destruction and blood. The puppet had moved through the neighborhood with a vicious purpose, leaving behind scenes of carnage that were difficult to comprehend. Houses were broken into, their interiors vandalized in a frenzy, blood splattered across walls and floors. The bodies, they were mangled almost beyond recognition, victims of a rage that was both savage and deliberate. Each new scene of horror fueled my determination. I wouldn't let this continue. As I moved through the night, a pattern began to emerge. Mr. Giggles was heading towards the heart of the neighborhood, towards the old park with its sprawling ancient oak trees and dense underbrush, a perfect place to hide. Reaching the park, I paused at the edge, peering into the thick darkness under the trees. The playground, once a place of joy and laughter, now seemed sinister, bathed in the pale light of the moon. It was here in this desolate place that I found him. Mr. Giggles stood in the center of the playground, his wooden body illuminated by the moonlight, giving him an almost spectral appearance. His head was tilted, those large, glassy eyes fixed on me, and his painted mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. The sight of him, standing there so confidently, sent a wave of fear and anger through me. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty park. "This ends now!" Mr. Giggles didn't move, but his voice, that chilling mimicry of childlike glee, rang out. "But we're just getting started, John. So much fun to be had." Without another word, I charged. The puppet sprang to life, moving with a speed and agility that seemed impossible. The ensuing struggle was a blur of motion and violence. Mr. Giggles was strong, far stronger than his size suggested, his wooden limbs striking with a force that left bruises and cuts. I swung the bat with all my might, each hit accompanied by the splintering sound of wood, but he kept coming. It was as if the blood he had spilled had given him unnatural vitality. We crashed through the playground, a deadly dance of predator and prey. The fight drew the attention of the neighborhood. Lights flicked on in the surrounding houses, and soon, the sounds of sirens filled the air. The police arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their shouts adding to the chaos. In the confusion, Mr. Giggles slipped away, vanishing into the night like a phantom. I was left there panting and bleeding, surrounded by officers who looked at me with a mix of suspicion and disbelief. My story, the truth about Mr. Giggles, was met with skepticism. How could they believe such an outlandish tale? In the eyes of the law, I was a man unhinged, a suspect in a string of brutal attacks. I was taken into custody, my protests falling on deaf ears. As I sat in the back of the police car, watching my neighborhood recede into the distance, I knew that Mr. Giggles was still out there, his reign of terror far from over. And I, the only one who knew the truth, was powerless to stop him. Now I sit in a cold, sterile cell, a far cry from the life I once knew. The days blend into one another, each marked by the heavy silence of isolation and the weight of accusations I can't escape. I am awaiting trial for a string of murders that I did not commit, yet cannot prove my innocence. The story of Mr. Giggles, as true as it is, sounds like the ravings of a madman. My wife, unable to grasp the reality of my story and overwhelmed by the horror of the situation, has left me. She couldn't stand the media circus, the accusatory glances, and the whispers of our once friendly neighbors. I can't blame her. The man she knew, the life we had, has been irrevocably shattered by the malevolent string of events triggered by that accursed puppet. The attacks in the neighborhood ceased as abruptly as they had started, leaving a community in mourning, grappling with the aftermath of inexplicable violence. The police, satisfied with having a suspect in custody, have closed the case, attributing the brutal events to a sudden psychotic break on my part. In a cruel twist of fate, a puppet was found in the nursery of our home. But it was not Mr. Giggles. This one was just a puppet, an ordinary inanimate object, devoid of the sinister life that had inhabited its counterpart. It sat there, a mocking reminder of the truth only I knew and could not prove. The truth of Mr. Giggles, the living puppet with a thirst for blood and chaos, has been buried under the weight of rational explanations and legal proceedings. No one believes in living puppets, in objects possessed with a malevolent spirit. It's the stuff of horror stories, not real life. And yet I know what I saw, what I fought, what I feared. As I lay on the thin mattress in my cell, staring up at the blank ceiling, the events replay in my mind. The laughter, the attacks, the blood. It was all too real, too visceral to be a figment of my imagination. But in a world that values evidence and logic, my story is nothing but the delusions of a man accused of unspeakable crimes. I am haunted by the memory of Mr. Giggles, by the lives lost, and by the knowledge that the true monster is still out there. But who will believe me? Who will listen to the tale of a man condemned by his own unbelievable truth? Here in the confines of my cell, I'm left to grapple with the reality of my situation. The world has moved on, but I remain trapped, not just by the bars that hold me, but by the knowledge of what happened. A truth too bizarre and terrifying to be understood or accepted. And so I wait, a prisoner not just of the law, but of an inescapable truth that has cost me everything.
And so, another tale from the depths of night concludes. But remember, dear listeners, in the realm of midnight whispers, the echoes of our stories never truly fade. If tonight's tale left you hungering for more, explore our anthology of horrors. For those brave enough, delve into our previous stories and discover what lurks in the shadows. Before you venture back into the safety of daylight, remember to like this video if it sent shivers down your spine. Subscribe and ring the bell, so the whispers of the midnight hour always find their way to you. And should you dare, leave your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We revel in knowing which parts of our tales resonate with your darkest curiosities. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers, for they have many tales to tell.